Once upon a time, in the sprawling township of Kailicha, on the outskirts of Cape Town, there lived a boy named Sipho who had his head perpetually tilted toward the heavens. While other children his age played with makeshift soccer balls fashioned from plastic bags and string, Sipho would lie on his back on the dusty ground, watching the silver birds streak across the endless blue sky above. "That boy is always looking up," his grandmother, Gogo Namsa, would say with a mixture of fondness and concern. "His neck is going to get stuck that way." But Sipho didn't care. Every time a plane passed overhead, something deep inside his chest would flutter with excitement. He would imagine himself up there, soaring through the clouds, free from the corrugated iron shacks, the muddy streets, and the daily struggle that defined life in their corner of the world. His family lived in a two-room shack that barely kept out the Cape Town winds. His mother, Namthandezo, worked as a domestic worker in the wealthy suburbs, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. His father had left when Sipho was just 3 years old, leaving behind only a faded photograph and empty promises. "Mama," Sipho would ask during their quiet evening meals of pap and morogo, "who flies those planes?" His mother would smile tiredly. "People with education, my boy. People who went to university and studied hard." "Then I'll study hard too," Sipho would declare with the unwavering confidence that only a child possesses. His mother's smile would falter slightly. University seemed as distant as the planes themselves, a luxury for people in a different world entirely. Years passed, and Sipho's fascination with aviation only grew stronger. At 12 years old, he had memorized the flight patterns of every airline that passed over Kailicha. He could identify aircraft by their engine sounds alone, much to the amazement of his friends who had long since given up trying to understand his obsession. The local library became his sanctuary. It was a small, understaffed building with peeling paint and broken windows, but to Sipho, it was a treasure trove. He devoured every book about aviation he could find, teaching himself about lift, thrust, drag, and the physics of flight. The librarian, Mrs. September, took notice of the thin boy who came in every day after school, his uniform worn but clean, his eyes bright with curiosity. "You know, Sipho," she said one afternoon, "there's a computer here. It's old, but it works. I could show you how to use it." That was the day Sipho discovered the internet. While his friends played outside, he spent hours reading about famous pilots, studying aircraft designs, and dreaming of flight academies that seemed impossibly far away. But dreams don't fill empty stomachs. At home, the situation was getting worse. His mother had been working for the same family for years, but they had decided to move abroad. Finding new employment was proving difficult, and the family's meager savings were dwindling fast. "Sipho," his mother said one evening, her voice heavy with regret, "I found you a job at the market. Mr. Jacobs needs help carrying goods. It's not much, but we need the money." Sipho's heart sank. He was only 13, and the thought of leaving school felt like watching his dreams crash and burn. But he looked at his mother's tired face, at his grandmother's worried expression, and he nodded. "I'll work after school, Mama. I won't stop studying." The Kailicha market was a bustling maze of vendors, customers, and the constant haggling that defined township commerce. Sipho's job was simple but backbreaking: carry heavy bags of vegetables, maize, and other goods from the delivery trucks to the stalls. His small frame struggled under the weight, but he persevered, driven by the knowledge that every rand he earned helped keep his family afloat. Mr. Jacobs, the market supervisor, was a gruff man with calloused hands and a weathered face. But he had a soft spot for the quiet boy who never complained, no matter how heavy the load. "You're different from the others," Mr. Jacobs observed one sweltering afternoon. "They work for money. You work like you're trying to buy something special." Sipho wiped the sweat from his brow and looked up at a plane passing overhead. "I am, sir. I'm trying to buy my way into the sky." Mr. Jacobs followed his gaze and chuckled. "Flying, eh? That's a rich man's game, boy." "Maybe," Sipho replied, hefting another bag onto his shoulders. "But I'm not giving up." Every day after work, Sipho would return to the library, his muscles aching but his mind hungry for knowledge. He started a notebook, filling it with everything he learned about aerodynamics, navigation, and flight procedures. Mrs. September began leaving aviation magazines and printouts for him, collected from her own research. "Knowledge is the only thing they can't take away from you," she would tell him. Months turned into years. Sipho's body grew stronger from the physical labor, but more importantly, his determination grew unshakable. He learned to fix the market's old generator, impressing everyone with his mechanical aptitude. He helped other vendors with their bookkeeping, developing a reputation for being smart and reliable. But the planes still called to him. Every day, without fail, he would pause in his work to watch them soar overhead, his heart aching with longing. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when everything changed. Sipho was unloading vegetables when he heard an unusual sound, a helicopter circling low over the township. Unlike the commercial planes that passed high overhead, this aircraft landed in the open field near the market, kicking up a cloud of dust. A small crowd gathered, curious and cautious. From the helicopter emerged a tall black man in a crisp pilot's uniform, accompanied by a woman carrying a camera. They were part of a documentary crew, filming a story about aviation careers. Sipho dropped the bag he was carrying and pushed through the crowd, his heart racing. For the first time in his life, he was standing face to face with a real pilot. The pilot, Captain Thembu, looked down at the earnest young man with dirt on his hands and dreams in his eyes. Something in Sipho's expression reminded him of himself at that age. "What's your name, son?" "Sipho Ndlovu, sir." "Well, Sipho, it wasn't easy. I grew up in Soweto, worked 3 jobs to pay for flight training. But I had something that money couldn't buy. I had determination." The conversation lasted only 10 minutes, but it changed Sipho's life forever. Captain Thembu told him about a new government initiative, a youth development program that was looking for promising young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to train as pilots. "The applications are due next month," Captain Thembu said, pressing a business card into Sipho's hand. "But I have to warn you, the selection process is brutal. They're only taking 20 candidates from the entire country." As the helicopter lifted off, Sipho stood in the settling dust, clutching the card like a lifeline. For the first time, his dream had an address, a phone number, a real pathway forward. That night, he barely slept. He paced their small shack, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. His mother watched him with concern. "What is it, my boy? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sipho told her everything about the pilot, the program, the opportunity that felt too good to be true. His mother listened in silence, her expression unreadable. "Sipho," she said finally, "I've watched you chase this dream for years. If this is real, if this is your chance, then you must take it. But you must also be prepared for disappointment." "I know, Mama, but I have to try." The application process was daunting. Sipho needed academic transcripts, recommendation letters, and an essay explaining why he wanted to become a pilot. But the biggest challenge was the application fee, 500 rand, more money than his family had seen in months. Sipho worked extra hours at the market, taking on any job he could find. He cleaned stalls after closing, helped vendors with their inventory, and even started a small business buying and selling phone credit. Every rand was precious, every coin counted. Mrs. September helped him with the essay, staying after library hours to help him craft his words. "Write from your heart," she advised. "Tell them not just what you want, but why you want it." Sipho wrote about the boy who watched planes, about the dreams that kept him going through the hardest times. He wrote about wanting to prove that greatness could come from anywhere, even from the dusty streets of Kailicha. He wrote about his desire to one day return and show other township kids that the sky wasn't the limit, it was just the beginning. Getting the recommendation letters was harder. His teachers at the struggling township school were supportive, but worried that their endorsements might not carry much weight. It was Mr. Jacobs who surprised everyone by offering to write a letter. "I may not have fancy education," he said, "but I know character when I see it. This boy has something special." The day came to submit the application. Sipho took 2 taxis to reach the Aviation Authority offices in Cape Town city center. The gleaming building was unlike anything he'd ever seen, marble floors, glass walls, and people in expensive suits walking with purpose. He felt terribly out of place in his best clothes, which were still obviously secondhand. But he squared his shoulders and walked to the reception desk, his application folder clutched tightly in his hands. "I'm here to submit my application for the youth pilot program," he said. The receptionist barely looked up. "Application fee?" Sipho handed over the envelope containing every rand he'd saved. His entire future, purchased with months of backbreaking labor. "You'll hear back in 6 weeks," the receptionist said dismissively. As Sipho walked back to the taxi rank, he felt a mixture of relief and terror. He'd done it. He'd taken the first step toward his dream. Now all he could do was wait. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning while Sipho was at work. His mother brought it to the market, her hands shaking as she handed it to him. "It's from the Aviation Authority," she whispered. Sipho's heart hammered against his ribs as he tore open the envelope. The words blurred together at first, but then 3 life-changing words jumped out at him. "Congratulations, you have been selected." He had made it to the next round, a series of tests that would determine the final 20 candidates. The testing would take place in Johannesburg, and candidates were responsible for their own transportation and accommodation. Sipho sank onto a crate of vegetables, the letter trembling in his hands. He'd cleared the first hurdle, but now faced an even bigger challenge. The trip to Johannesburg would cost more money than his family had ever possessed. "We'll find a way," his mother said fiercely. "We'll sell everything if we have to." But Sipho couldn't bear the thought of his family sacrificing even more for his dream. That evening, he sat with his grandmother, sharing his dilemma. "Go," he said. "What if I'm being selfish? What if I'm chasing something impossible while my family suffers?" His grandmother, who had lived through apartheid and poverty, who had raised children in the worst of times, took his face in her weathered hands. "My boy," she said, "sometimes God plants a dream in someone's heart not just for them, but for everyone they'll lift up with them. Your dream is bigger than you think." Inspired by her words, Sipho did something he'd never done before. He asked for help. He approached local businesses, community leaders, and even the local radio station, sharing his story and his need. The response was overwhelming. Mr. Jacobs organized a fundraising event at the market. Mrs. September started a collection at the library. Even Captain Thembu, who had heard about Sipho's selection, sent a contribution with a note: "Invest in your future. The sky is waiting." 3 weeks later, Sipho boarded a bus to Johannesburg with enough money for the trip and a community's hopes riding on his shoulders. The testing facility in Johannesburg was intimidating, a sprawling complex of buildings, simulators, and actual aircraft. Sipho arrived with his small duffel bag and a heart full of determination, only to discover that he was competing against candidates who had attended private schools, whose parents were doctors and lawyers, who spoke about aviation with the casual confidence of those born to privilege. The first day was written exams, mathematics, physics, and general knowledge. Sipho's years of self-study at the library served him well, but he could see other candidates finishing quickly while he struggled with some of the more advanced concepts. The second day was psychological testing and interviews. Sipho sat across from a panel of stern-faced officials who questioned his background, his motivation, and his ability to handle the pressure of flight training. "Why should we choose you over candidates who have had better educational opportunities?" one examiner asked. Sipho thought about the boy who watched planes, about the years of carrying heavy bags and dreaming of soaring through clouds. "Because I know what it means to fight for something," he said. "I know what it means to work for every opportunity. Flying isn't just a career for me. It's the dream that's kept me going through everything." The third day was the practical test, time in a flight simulator. Sipho had never been inside an aircraft before, let alone operated flight controls. His hands shook as he gripped the yoke, but something magical happened when the simulator began to move. All those years of studying aerodynamics, of imagining himself in the cockpit, seemed to come together in that moment. The instructor, a grizzled former Air Force pilot, watched with interest as Sipho quickly grasped the basic controls. "Have you flown before?" he asked. "No, sir," Sipho replied, his eyes fixed on the instruments. "But I've been flying in my dreams for years." When the testing was over, Sipho felt exhausted but oddly peaceful. He had given everything he had, and now his future was in someone else's hands. The results came 2 weeks later. Out of hundreds of applicants, 20 names were selected for the year-long pilot training program. Sipho's name was number 17 on the list. He was going to learn to fly. The pilot training program was unlike anything Sipho had ever experienced. Based at a small airfield outside Johannesburg, it combined intensive classroom instruction with hands-on flight training. The days began before dawn and ended well after sunset, filled with navigation theory, meteorology, aircraft systems, and precious hours in the cockpit. Sipho's first real flight was in a small Cessna 172 with his instructor, Captain Dupreez, a patient man who had seen many young pilots take their first steps into the sky. "Remember," Captain Dupreez said as they taxied to the runway, "flying is about confidence and respect. Confidence in your training, respect for the aircraft and the air around you." As the plane lifted off the ground, Sipho felt something he'd never experienced before, a sense of complete rightness, as if he'd finally found where he belonged. The ground fell away below them, the world spread out like a map, and for the first time in his life, he was truly flying. "How does it feel?" Captain Dupree's asked through the headset. Sipho's voice was thick with emotion. "Like coming home." The training was rigorous and demanding. Several candidates dropped out, unable to handle the pressure or the academic requirements. Sipho struggled with some of the more complex navigation procedures, but his determination and natural feel for flying kept him going. His fellow trainees came from various backgrounds, but most had advantages Sipho lacked. They had cars to drive to the airfield, money for extra study materials, and family support that didn't come with the burden of financial worry. But Sipho had something they didn't. He had hunger. Every evening, while others relaxed or went out to restaurants, Sipho stayed at the airfield, studying aircraft manuals and practicing on the flight simulators. He formed a study group with 3 other candidates, sharing knowledge and supporting each other through the difficult periods. "You know what I admire about you, Sipho," said James, one of his study partners who came from a wealthy Johannesburg family. "You never complain. You never make excuses. You just keep pushing forward." Sipho smiled. "When you've dreamed of something your whole life, you don't waste time complaining when it gets hard. You just work harder." Halfway through the program, Sipho achieved a milestone that marked him as exceptional. He soloed for the first time, flying the aircraft completely alone. As he climbed through the clouds above the training field, he thought about the boy who used to lie on his back in Khayelitsha, watching planes pass overhead. That boy's dream was finally taking flight. Graduation day arrived with the golden light of a high-felt morning. Sipho's family made the journey from Cape Town, his mother taking her first airplane flight, his grandmother marveling at the aircraft lined up on the tarmac. Mrs. September and Mr. Jacobs were there too, along with Captain Thembu and dozens of others from a community who had supported his journey. Of the 20 candidates who had started the program, 18 successfully completed it. Sipho graduated 3rd in his class, earning his private pilot's license and a pathway to commercial aviation training. The ceremony was held in a hangar decorated with the flags of South Africa and various aviation organizations. As Sipho walked across the stage to receive his wings, he felt the weight of every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt that had brought him to this point. "Ladies and gentlemen," the program director announced, "I present to you South Africa's newest pilots, living proof that dreams really can take flight." After the ceremony, Sipho's mother pulled him aside, tears streaming down her face. "Your father should be here to see this," she whispered. "He would be so proud." Sipho hugged her tightly. "He is here, Mama. Everyone who believed in me is here." The celebration continued late into the evening, but Sipho found himself drawn to the quiet of the hangar where the training aircraft were parked. He stood next to the Cessna 172 that had been his first solo aircraft, running his hand along its wing. Captain Dupree's found him there, having second thoughts. Sipho shook his head. "Just thinking about how far I've come. A year ago, I was carrying vegetables in Khayelitsha. Now I'm a pilot." "You're more than that," Captain Dupree said. "You're an inspiration. Did you know that applications for the next pilot program have tripled? They're calling it the Sipho effect. Young people from townships across the country are applying because you showed them it's possible." That night, as Sipho lay in his small accommodation room, he thought about the future. He had job offers from several airlines, opportunities to fly cargo planes, passenger aircraft, even helicopters. But there was something else calling to him, a voice that sounded like his grandmother's, reminding him that his dream was bigger than just himself. 5 years later, Captain Sipho Ndlovu stood in front of a group of wide-eyed children in the same Khayelitsha library where he had first learned about aviation. But this time he wasn't alone. With him were 3 other young pilots from the township, all graduates of the program he had helped establish, the Wings of Hope initiative. Who here has ever watched a plane fly overhead and wondered what it would be like to be up there? Sipho asked. Every hand in the room shot up, just as his would have done all those years ago. "Well, let me tell you a story," Sipho continued, his voice warm with memory. "Once upon a time, there was a boy who lived right here in Khayelitsha. He spent his days carrying heavy bags at the market and his nights dreaming of flying. People told him it was impossible, that flying was for other people, people with money and connections." The children leaned forward, captivated. But that boy had something more powerful than money. He had a dream and the determination to chase it. Today, that boy is standing here as a commercial airline pilot, and he's not the only one. There are dozens of us now, pilots, engineers, air traffic controllers, all from townships just like this one. After the presentation, a young girl approached Sipho. She was about 10 years old, with bright eyes and a shy smile. "Captain Sipho," she said, "I want to be a pilot too. But my family doesn't have money for flying lessons." Sipho knelt down to her level, seeing himself in her hopeful expression. "What's your name?" "Namsa," she replied, "like my grandmother." "Well, Namsa, let me tell you something important. The Wings of Hope program provides full scholarships for kids who show promise and determination. We have computers here where you can learn, books about aviation, and mentors who will help you study. But most importantly, we have something that money can't buy. We have proof that it's possible." He pointed to the window, where a plane was visible crossing the sky. "You see that aircraft up there? The pilot could be someone just like you. In fact, it might be you someday." As the children filed out of a library, chattering excitedly about airplanes and dreams, Mrs. September approached Sipho. She was older now, her hair completely gray, but her eyes still sparkled with the same enthusiasm she'd shown when helping a young boy with his first aviation book. "You know what the most beautiful part of this story is," she said. "What's that?" "It's not over. Every time you inspire one of these children, every time someone from a township earns their wings, the story continues. Your dream has become their dream, and their dreams will become someone else's." Sipho looked out at the township where he'd grown up, where he'd learned to dream impossible dreams. The corrugated iron roofs still gleamed in the sun, the dusty streets still bustled with life, but something had changed. Hope had taken root here, and it was growing. That evening, as Sipho flew a commercial flight from Cape Town to Johannesburg, he looked down at the lights of Kailicha twinkling below. Somewhere down there, a young boy or girl was probably lying on their back, looking up at his plane and dreaming of the sky. The boy who once watched planes had become the pilot that other children watched, and the circle was complete. But more than that, it was expanding, growing, reaching toward a future where dreams had no limits, and the sky truly was just the beginning. From the cockpit of his airliner, Captain Sipho Ndlova smiled and adjusted his heading toward the stars, carrying with him the hopes of a community and the knowledge that sometimes the most impossible dreams are just waiting for someone brave enough to chase them. And they all lived not just happily ever after, but purposefully ever after, turning their dreams into stepping stones for others to follow. The end. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more inspirational story.